A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Tuesday, Greg Bondar is joining us. He's national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia, a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. Greg Bondar, a special welcome back to 2020.
Delighted to be with you, Neil. My apologies, I have to turn the mute off.
That's it. Okay, now I've got you. Hey, welcome along, Greg.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, and delighted as usual because I've got some really interesting topics to talk to you about today.
Let's talk about why young women are leaving the church. It might be a surprise for some.
Yeah, Neil, this came about with a discussion with my two daughters-in-law and our youth leader here at Every Home for Christ. Neil, this is disturbing because what they're telling me is that women, generally the younger ones, and maybe we could say 18 to 25 or a bit older, are actually leaving the church and organised religion at alarmingly high rates, Neil. This is very disturbing.
All right, and some might say, well, men have been leaving the church for years, and if women are leaving the church, well, we hope there's going to be someone left, and of course there are going to be people who are going to be populating the churches left, right and centre. But if there is a alarming trend, perhaps we need to talk about it. Women leaving the church and organised religion. Surprisingly high rates. What do we understand about this, Greg?
Yeah, Neil, as a result of the discussion with my daughters-in-law and our youth leader here, who you've spoken to, Neil, research is indicating a number of interesting facts. You and I would both know that women have always outnumbered men in religious service, and I know when I go to church, there always tend to be more women than men. It doesn't matter which church I go to. It seems to be a fact of life. But now the tide is turning, and women are leaving. Now, some research has come up very surprising results. And quite frankly, one of the issues that came up was over complementarian theology. That is, complementarians believe that men and women are equal, but different by divine design. So a lot of women are now questioning this. And they're saying to me, and based on research, that there is possibly sexism in the Bible. The church and secular culture don't mix. And in particular, a lot of women are telling me that they've read about or heard about moral failure of high-profile Christian leaders. And this has really worried them as women attending a church or a religious institution, Neil.
And when we look at it to the cultural context of where the Bible is written over those thousands of years, we're going to find an awful lot of things there that we might want to criticise, given the common thinking for today's world. But a lot of people, Greg, they might not even be very familiar with this word complementarian theology, and some churches, they've never heard of that because they never ever thought there was an issue about, equality between men and women or equality by design and different functions, and people don't even think of it. But there are some churches that do think very, very deeply about these sorts of things. I wonder whether I'm sure the research might have some sort of detail, but, what sort of churches are losing women at this great rate of knots?
Yeah, Neil, you raised a good issue because, you see, Christianity has always valued monogamous marriages, motherhood, the family. But the more I look at it and the more churches that I attend, they don't really address this topic about the role of women within the church. And in fact, what I'm finding is that a lot of the LGBTIQA affirming churches have multiplied in recent decades, as you would well be aware, and actually forcing women to question their biblical beliefs. In other words, women are starting to reject biblical sexual ethic. Now, that's a real issue that we need to address now.
It is. And just to, perhaps before we even develop this further, talking about this complementarianism, that's different to complementary with an I, complementary
Right.
with an E. That's got a different connotation on it. And so when we're talking about issues around equal equality, essential equality, which is what we'd understand, men and women are equal. This complementarianism, this is about two parts needed to complete a whole. Now, I don't know whether you've got any further clarification on that, but two completing, making a whole actually is something we all ought to be able to aspire to, isn't it?
Absolutely, Neil. And this is the point I'm making, that men and women are complementary. And, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately in this instance because women are misreading, perhaps some women, not all women, are misreading the context of the Bible in saying that, men are better than women. No. By divine design, we have been made male and female. We are meant to be a unit, a family unit, monogamous marriage, and we need to make sure that this is the understanding. Because, you see, what's happened, Neil, is that that the pastors in churches, and I say that generally because they do a great job, you and I both know that, but there's a failure to preach the role of a biblical woman of fear of being cancelled, Neil. And you and I both know that that's a big threat to a lot of pastors.
And young women in particular perhaps are the ones who are being swept along by this sort of secularism current that takes you off a biblical course. And as you say, there are now churches that are affirming LGBTQI, and there are all sorts of things that can sweep you away from a biblical understanding of this wonderful role, men and women. And just for a reminder for listeners, a man and a woman, so when they marry, they become one flesh. So there's that wholeness issue that's wrapped up in that sort of illustration. But there are lots of currents in lots of churches sweeping us in all sorts of different directions, Greg.
Absolutely, Neil. And one of the things I've discovered, which, I'm a political animal in many ways, but I've discovered, Neil, both by research and by actual attendance at churches, women have moved more to the left of politics than men have. And that being the case, I wonder whether that political left-leaning has urged a lot of the young ones, at university, and you've even got Bible colleges now not teaching true biblical beliefs. Neil, that could be a factor as to why young women are leaving the church.
And just interested in the way you say pastors are so often reluctant to preach the role of biblical womanhood because they're afraid of being cancelled. There's a lot of pressure on pastors. That old saying, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But biblical truth doesn't take any notice of whether you are actually are going to feel good about it or people are going to feel good about you. Biblical truth stands on its own, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what happens is really that pastors are fearful because, you see, young women, the youth are important for our next development. And if they are being cancelled, and I've got to tell you, a lot of pastors are being ridiculed or saying, you're old-fashioned, women can do what they like now, it's sexual freedom, and we look after ourselves. And if you start preaching the biblical view of women, you're going to be in a lot of trouble from the younger generation. So I think we've got to stand up for our true biblical beliefs, Neil, a pastor or family member or whatever.
And, at the risk of harping on some things, as I've been saying for so many years now, since the redefinition of marriage, I often will say that when we lost the definition of marriage between a man and a woman, it's women who were the biggest losers because now we don't have man-woman tension and all of those things to fight for in equality. Now you've got a squillion genders and you've got all sorts of confusion around sexuality. And so women need to be thinking very carefully about what that means for them and rediscovering biblical definitions. Hey, let's move on. Some other issues you've been looking at. How we defend biblical truth with our vote. Well, we've just had a Queensland state election. Now all eyes will be pointed towards a federal election, perhaps early in the new year. What are your thoughts here about defending biblical truth with our vote?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Look, I'm surprised at the number of people that have rung me. I must have something written on my forehead that says, ring me if you're in trouble about how to vote, because I've had people ring me and say, Greg, how should I vote in the Queensland elections? I said, I can't tell you how to vote, but I can tell you what you should be voting for. And that is the general Christian view. That should be the general Christian view. Because what's happening is that, guess what, Neil? At the presidential elections coming up in November, in about a week's time, I've just found out that over 41 million Christians are unlikely to be voting because they don't see a connection between politics and the church. Now, that is really disturbing because, quite frankly, Neil, I have to tell you, engagement in politics is not just a civic duty, but a biblical imperative in my view, Neil.
And if the national values are aligned with your Christian values, you perhaps don't need to worry too much about how you defend them. But as soon as your national values are taking a detour and no longer align with your Christian values, something's got to come over you with some sort of imperative that says, well, voting is the only way I get to have a say about who is setting the national values.
Absolutely. I've always said you need to vote in a way that honours God. In other words, support policies that uphold biblical values. In my view, Neil, you support government as you're meant to be biblically, give Caesar what Caesar is due. But what you do is you support government up to the point that it conflicts with your faith. And that's my view, because we've got to make sure that, make no mistake, Neil, Christians must vote and they must engage in the political arena if we're to have a flourishing society into the future.
And coming back to what you were saying, people don't want to be told how to vote. And we always go out of our way to say we're not telling anyone how to vote. But they do need to know and want to know why they should vote and how those policies that all the parties are putting forward for election actually are contrasted with a biblical view. And so that's where we often need to be a help for people and showing people how they should look at the policies that are contrasted with our Christian values. So you mentioned the American election is coming up. We'll be looking on with very significant interest because there is a very big moral issue that seems to be one of the biggest issues, and that, of course, is the abortion issue in the US presidential election. That's there's something that if you say, well, how do my Christian values conflict with policies there? It's a pretty clear-cut one, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the big policies there at the moment that the Christians are looking at are life policies, religious freedom policies, marriage, family and sexuality. Now, these are the issues that are being looked at that particular election. But, Neil, the problem we've got is if a political party tells you, Neil, I'm going to increase your pension by $50, but it's the same party that supports homosexuality, no religious freedom, abortion, euthanasia. I mean, what do you put first, your $50 pension, or do you put your biblical faith first? This is the real issue for Christians. And I struggle sometimes myself, Neil, but you've got to be a Bible-believing Christian.
Okay, you are planning to attend the Australian National Prayer Breakfast coming up in Canberra. It'll be the 35th year they've had a National Prayer Breakfast coming up on the 4th of November. What's so special about it?
Look, the real issue here is that the particular person, Priyan, I've got to pronounce his name, Jagannathan, is a wonderful, I think he's Sri Lankan, Neil. Now, we support a lot of schools and Sri Lanka as a matter of humanitarian aid. But guess what he's going to be speaking about? On how do you marry up the materially prosperous but spiritually unsatisfied world. In other words, he's saying that, we've got to make a sense of the issues through a Christian worldview. Now, he's been a political advisor like myself. He's a lawyer. And I'm really looking forward to see how he brings together faith, grace, the importance of faith and politics. And this particular breakfast, which Every Home for Christ is sponsoring, by the way, is going to be something that is worth listening to, because I think, we've got to bring politics back into Parliament. This is one way of doing it, I guess.
And can anyone go along to that National Prayer Breakfast? How do you actually register to be a part of it? I mean, there's time between now and the 4th of November to plan a visit to Canberra and be there. Can anyone go?
Absolutely, Neil. We've actually got a table there which is full. I would have invited you, Neil, but I know you're a busy man, but anyone can register. Just go to the Australian National Prayer Breakfast, log on, You have to get there the night before because it starts at 7:15 a.m. on the Monday morning, and I'm really looking forward to listening to this particular chap. And by the way, Neil, no media are invited, so it's a totally in-house Christian event making inroads into Canberra. So it's highly recommended, highly worthwhile. But in particular, Neil, isn't it interesting that the US National Prayer Breakfast held in Washington is on the first Thursday in February each year? So it would be great, Neil. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a national prayer breakfast every week in Canberra?
Wouldn't it be great? And Max Jagannathan, and he has been a guest on 2020, but yes, some time back now. You're talking about the 4th of November for listeners who might want to go along and be a part of that in the Great Hall at Australian Parliament House in Canberra, and I'm not sure, do you have to register a ticket? I guess you could probably Google that, find out all the details about how you could go, but I'm pretty sure that wherever you might be coming from around the nation, you'd be welcome to attend that event in the Great Hall at the Australian Parliament House. And if you're looking for a good reason to pop down to Canberra for a bit of a holiday, or up to Canberra, or, going east to Canberra from wherever you might be coming from, I'm sure that could be a great way to actually see the nation's capital. Thanks so much for another great update today, Greg Bondar. Christian Voice Australia, a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. The connecting point is this: christianvoiceaustralia.blog. christianvoiceaustralia.blog. Greg Bondar, thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil, and every blessing for the work that you do.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.